Michael Chen's fingers trembled as he scrolled through his son's TikTok account for the third time that night. The blue light from his phone cast harsh shadows across his home office, where he sat alone at 2 a.m., his usual stack of real estate contracts pushed aside and forgotten. The video that had caught his attention was already at 500,000 views and climbing. His 16-year-old son Jason's laughter echoed through the phone speakers, accompanied by the snickers of his friends as they approached an elderly homeless man outside their local coffee shop. "Watch this, guys." Jason's voice rang clear in the video. "Hey mister, are you hungry? We got you something special." The camera shook with poorly contained laughter as Jason extended a wrapped package toward the man, whose weathered face lifted with a mix of hope and hesitation. Michael's stomach churned as he watched the scene unfold. The homeless man's trembling hands reached for what he thought was a sandwich, only to find it filled with paper and coffee grounds. The cruel prank was met with raucous laughter from behind the camera, while the man's face crumpled in disappointment and shame. The comments section overflowed with laughing emojis and praise for Jason's epic prank. "Savage, bro. This is why I follow you. Do more homeless pranks." A memory surfaced in Michael's mind. His own father, Robert Chen, sitting at their kitchen table 27 years ago, his head in his hands after losing everything in the '87 market crash. The same defeated look had crossed his father's face then, the look of a man whose dignity had been stripped away. Robert had fought his way back up from that bottom, working multiple jobs to ensure his son would never know that kind of hardship. Now here was Michael's own son, treating such hardship as entertainment. His fingers hovered over the phone, tempted to call Jason immediately, but he knew his son was sleeping in his room down the hall, probably dreaming up more content for his growing social media following. The irony wasn't lost on Michael. Just last week, he proudly watched Jason accept an award at his private school for outstanding community leadership after organizing a canned food drive. The sound of soft footsteps pulled Michael from his thoughts. Alina, their housekeeper who had been with the family since Jason was born, stood in the doorway with concern etched on her face. "Mr. Chen, it's very late," she said softly. "Is everything okay?" Michael realized she must have seen his office light on during her final rounds of the house. He turned his phone screen toward her, playing the video. Alina's usual warm expression hardened as she watched, her hand rising to cover her mouth. "I failed him, Alina," Michael whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Somewhere between giving him everything and protecting him from nothing, I've raised a son who thinks other people's suffering is entertaining." Alina stepped into the office, her presence carrying the weight of someone who had watched Jason grow up alongside his father. "The boy I know is in there somewhere, Mr. Chen. The one who used to give his lunch money to Sarah in 3rd grade because her family couldn't afford the cafeteria food. Remember?" Michael nodded slowly, remembering the proud father he'd been that day when the school called about Jason's generosity. Where had that empathetic child gone? How had his son transformed into someone who could laugh at another person's misfortune? As he stared at the paused video, focusing on the homeless man's eyes, something shifted in Michael's mind. Those eyes, they reminded him so much of his father's during their darkest days. The same pride struggling against desperation, the same flicker of hope quickly extinguished by circumstance, or in this case, by his own son's cruelty. "Something needs to change," Michael said firmly, standing up from his desk. The first rays of dawn were beginning to creep through his office window, and with them came clarity. He wouldn't just lecture Jason about empathy. Words were cheap, and his son had already proven himself skilled at saying the right things while doing the opposite. No, this situation called for something more radical. What Michael needed was a plan that would show Jason the truth about privilege, humanity, and the thin line between comfort and catastrophe. As he finally headed to bed, the seeds of an idea were already taking root in his mind. The Grand Horizon Hotel's ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and wealthy donors, all gathered for the annual Youth Leadership Awards. Michael stood at the back, watching his son Jason approach the podium in his perfectly tailored Navy suit. The irony of the moment wasn't lost on him. Less than 48 hours had passed since he'd discovered the viral video, and here was Jason, about to accept an award for community service. I believe that true leadership begins with compassion. Jason's voice carried confidently across the hushed room. When I started the Hands and Hearts initiative at Street Margaret's Prep, I wanted to show that our generation understands the importance of giving back. Michael noticed several parents dabbing at their eyes with monogrammed handkerchiefs. Even the event photographer had paused to listen, captivated by his son's perfectly crafted words about empathy and social responsibility. Jason's speech was flawless. Every pause calculated, every gesture practiced to perfection. And that's why, Jason continued, his voice carrying just the right amount of emotion, I've pledged to expand our outreach programs to help more homeless shelters in our community, because everyone deserves dignity. Everyone deserves to be seen. The bitter taste of coffee rose in Michael's throat as he remembered the homeless man's face from the video. He slipped out of the ballroom, needing air, only to freeze in the ornate corridor as he heard familiar voices around the corner. "Dude, did you see that crusty guy outside?" Jason's voice, completely transformed from his speech tone, carried through the hallway. He tried to open the door for me like some kind of bootleg valet. Laughter followed. His friends Tyler and Marcus, sons of other prominent families. Michael pressed himself against the wall, listening. "Your speech was fire, though," Marcus said. "My mom was literally crying." "It's all about the delivery," Jason replied, and Michael could hear the smirk in his voice. "Drop some words like dignity and compassion, pause for effect, and they eat it up. Dad's probably already calling the contractor to add another shelf for this trophy." "Speaking of your dad," Tyler chimed in, "isn't he friends with the scholarship committee? Think you can put in a word for me?" "Please," Jason scoffed. "Those scholarships should go to actual poor people. Your father's yacht is only 40 feet long, not 30. More laughter. Michael felt each chuckle like a physical blow. He thought of his own father again, of the years Robert Chen spent rebuilding their family's fortune, teaching Michael the value of genuine hard work and integrity. Now here was his grandson, treating compassion like a performance art. "Mr. Chen." Michael turned to find David Wong, his oldest friend and business partner, studying him with concern. David had known Jason since birth, had been there through every milestone. "I need your help with something," Michael said suddenly, the plan that had been forming in his mind since that sleepless night finally crystallizing. Something unconventional. David raised an eyebrow, but before he could respond, the boys rounded the corner. Jason's face immediately shifted, the smirk vanishing beneath a mask of respectful attention. "Dad, Uncle David, did you hear my speech?" The transformation was so seamless it was almost frightening. "I was just telling the guys about expanding the initiative to more shelters." Michael looked at his son, really looked at him. Behind the perfect smile and carefully styled hair, he saw something hollow, something that cared more about the appearance of goodness than goodness itself. He thought about all the times he praised Jason's achievements, his grades, his leadership roles, but when was the last time he praised his son for simply showing kindness? "The speech was beautiful, son," Michael said quietly. "But I wonder, what would you say if there were no cameras? No awards? No audience to impress?" Confusion flickered across Jason's face, but he recovered quickly. "I'd say the same thing, Dad. You know how passionate I am about helping others." David caught Michael's eye, seeing the pain there, understanding dawning on his face. As the boys excused themselves to rejoin the gala, David placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. "What do you need me to do?" he asked simply. Michael watched his son disappear back into the ballroom, where another round of applause was beginning. "I need to become invisible," he said. "And I need you to help me show my son what he refuses to see." The small makeup studio tucked away in the Arts District was nothing like the gleaming office buildings where Michael Chen usually conducted business. Rose Martinez's weathered hands worked methodically as she applied layers of theatrical makeup to his face, each stroke transforming the successful real estate developer into someone society would rather pretend didn't exist. "The key isn't just making you look homeless," Rose said softly, her skilled fingers adding subtle shadows beneath his eyes. "It's making people want to look away from you. 20 years on the streets taught me that invisibility isn't about not being seen. It's about making others uncomfortable enough to choose not to see you." Michael's eyes snapped to her face. "You were homeless." "Yes." Rose dabbed at his cheeks with a sponge, aging his skin by decades. 3 years after my husband died. Medical bills took everything. I lived in my car until they took that too. Finally got back on my feet through a theater makeup program for people trying to restart their lives. She paused, studying her work. "Never thought I'd use these skills to help a millionaire understand his son." David sat in the corner, methodically distressing the shabby clothes they'd carefully selected. "The backstory we created should work," he said, rubbing dirt into the knees of what had been a decent pair of jeans. Former high school teacher Thomas Warren. Lost everything caring for his sick wife. Been on the streets for 3 years. "Tell me about Tom," Rose commanded, working on Michael's hairline. "Not the facts. Tell me who he is." Michael closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his new identity. "Tom still grades papers in his head," he said slowly. "When he sees students pass by, he mentally corrects their grammar. He keeps a torn photo of his wife, Sarah, in his coat pocket, though he hasn't looked at it in months because the edges are wearing away. He's not angry about where he is, just tired. So tired." Rose's hand stilled for a moment. "Good. Hold on to that feeling. He'll keep you safe when someone like your son tries to make you a punchline." The transformation continued in silence, broken only by the distant sound of traffic and the occasional direction from Rose. Michael watched in the mirror as his face disappeared beneath layers of carefully crafted destitution. The confident set of his jaw softened, his straight posture curved inward, his sharp eyes turned roomy and uncertain. "The watch," Rose said suddenly, pointing to his wrist. "It has to go." Michael touched the Patek Philippe automatically. It had been his father's gift when he made his first million, a reminder of how far they'd come from their darkest days. "Here," he said, slipping it off and holding it out to Rose. "Hold it as collateral. Proof that I'm coming back to settle my bill." Rose stared at the watch, then at him. "You still don't get it, do you? The real homeless can't leave collateral. They can't prove they're coming back. That's part of what keeps them trapped. No one trusts them to return, to pay, to succeed." She gently pushed his hand away. "Keep it. Part of your education is deciding what to do with it." The final touches were subtle, yellowed fingernails, cracked lips, a slight tremor in his right hand. When Michael stood, he barely recognized himself. Even his walk had changed, becoming the shuffle of someone who had nowhere particular to be. "One last thing," Rose said, reaching into her workstation. She pulled out a small cardboard sign, the edges frayed, the writing deliberately shaky. "Anything helps. God bless." "I don't think I need." Michael started. "You do," Rose cut him off. "Because the hardest part of being homeless isn't being hungry or cold. It's having to ask for help from a world that's already decided you don't deserve it." As Michael left through the back door, already practicing Tom's shuffle, David called after him. "Remember, I'll be watching from a distance. If anything goes wrong." But Michael was already gone, disappearing into the afternoon crowd. He clutched the sign in hands that no longer looked like his own, feeling the weight of his watch like a burning reminder of everything he was leaving behind. Temporarily, or perhaps, in some ways, forever. The first day of being invisible taught Michael more than 30 years of success ever had. He sat on his piece of cardboard outside the trendy cafe, where Jason and his friends often gathered after school, the same spot where they'd filmed their cruel prank just days before. His expensive watch was hidden beneath layers of shabby clothes, burning against his skin like a secret. Groups of teenagers flowed past him in waves, their chatter about tests and social media drifting through the air like scattered leaves. Most walked by as if he were part of the architecture. A hydrant, a lamppost, something to be navigated around without acknowledgement. The few who did glance his way quickly averted their eyes, their conversations dropping to whispers until they were safely past. "Did you see his latest video?" Michael's ears perked up at a familiar voice. Marcus, one of Jason's closest friends, was approaching with a group of students he recognized from Jason's private school. "The one with the homeless guy. Classic J-Chin content," someone replied, and Michael felt his stomach twist at their laughter. Then he saw his son, walking slightly ahead of the group, phone in hand as always. Jason was recording something, probably another TikTok, while walking backward, completely oblivious to Tom's presence. "Yo, check this out," Jason called to his friends. "New challenge idea. We get people to. Watch out, Jay." Marcus grabbed Jason's arm, pulling him away from nearly tripping over Michael's outstretched legs. For a moment, father and son were face to face. Michael held his breath, his heart hammering against his ribs. But Jason's eyes slid over him like oil over water, not a flicker of recognition in their depths. Instead, a familiar smirk spread across his face. "Perfect timing," Jason said, turning his phone toward Michael. "Hey, old-timer, want to be TikTok famous?" Michael hunched deeper into Tom's character, mumbling incoherently as he practiced with Rose. His right hand trembled, no longer an act, but a genuine response to seeing his son's casual cruelty up close. "Come on," Jason pressed, his camera still rolling. "We'll even give you $5 if you do our challenge." That's like, what, 2 cups of coffee? "Leave him alone," a new voice cut through the scene. The girl Michael recognized as Sarah, the same Sarah who'd received Jason's lunch money all those years ago, stepped forward from the crowd. "He's not your content, Jason." Jason's face flickered with something: embarrassment, shame, before his social media persona slipped back into place. "Chill, Sarah. I'm trying to help him. $5 is $5, right? Like you helped that other man last week." Sarah's voice was quiet but sharp. "The one you humiliated for views." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. Michael watched his son's expression cycle through several emotions before settling on defensive amusement. "It was just a joke," Jason said, but there was a slight waver in his voice. "Besides, that video got me featured on 3 major accounts. Do you know how many followers? I know your dad volunteers at my mom's shelter sometimes." Sarah interrupted. "Maybe you should join him one day. Meet some real people instead of treating them like props." The irony of her words nearly made Michael laugh despite himself. If she only knew who was huddled before them, watching this drama unfold. Jason's phone lowered slightly, his confident facade cracking just enough to show something vulnerable underneath. For a moment, Michael saw his little boy again, the one who'd given away his lunch money, who'd cried at injured birds, who'd begged to help the old lady next door with her groceries. But then someone in the group shouted about being late for practice, and the moment shattered. Jason's walls slammed back up, his phone raised again like a shield. "Whatever," he said, stepping around Michael. "Let's go. This spot's dead anyway." As the group moved away, Sarah lingered for a moment. She placed a granola bar and a bottle of water next to Michael's sign. "I'm sorry about them," she said softly. "Not everyone's forgotten how to be human." Michael watched them all disappear into the cafe, his untouched offerings beside him. In his world, his real world, he was due at a board meeting in 20 minutes. Instead, he sat on his cardboard, invisible to his own son, learning lessons he'd never expected to teach. The evening air bit with unusual cruelty as Michael huddled deeper into his tattered coat, his 5th day as Tom testing his resolve like never before. The temperature had dropped unexpectedly, and even the genuine homeless people had sought warmer shelter, leaving the streets eerily empty. All except for one figure that caught Michael's eye. A teenage boy, probably no older than Jason, wearing a thin jacket and pacing near the closed convenience store. "Hey," Michael called out in Tom's gravelly voice. "You okay there, son?" The boy startled, then approached cautiously. Up close, Michael could see he was shivering. "I'm fine," he said, but his chattering teeth betrayed him. Just waiting for someone." "What's your name?" "Alex." He hesitated. "I used to go to Street Margaret's prep, but—" He trailed off, tugging his inadequate jacket tighter. Michael felt his heart skip. Street Margaret's was Jason's school. Before he could respond, a familiar laugh cut through the cold air. His son's voice carried from around the corner, accompanied by the usual crowd of friends. "Quick," Alex muttered, shrinking back into the shadows. "Please don't tell him you saw me." The group rounded the corner, phones already out, ready for their next viral moment. Michael watched his son stop short at the sight of them. The homeless man they'd been tormenting all week, and a familiar face from his past. "Alex." Jason's voice carried a note of genuine surprise. Weren't you in my English class last semester?" Alex straightened slightly, trying to summon dignity despite his obvious distress. "Yeah, before Dad lost his job," and he swallowed hard. "Look, just go ahead and film whatever prank you're planning. Get your likes. I don't care anymore." Michael watched something shift in Jason's expression. Recognition, perhaps even shame. His phone lowered slightly. But then Marcus stepped forward, camera already recording. "Dude, this is perfect. Your old classmate living the street life. This'll get 1 million views easy." "I don't know, man," Jason said quietly, but Michael could see the internal struggle playing out on his son's face as peer pressure warred with conscience. "Come on, Jason. Your followers are waiting. What's the move?" Michael saw the exact moment his son's humanity lost to his online persona. Jason's face hardened, his phone raised once more. "Hey Alex, remember when you used to brag about your dad's corner office? Look at you now. But hey, I'll make you famous. Might even help you out with some spare change if you do our challenge." The words hung in the frigid air like icicles. Alex's face crumpled, all pretense of strength evaporating. "You know what, Jason? My dad lost everything trying to save my mom's life. He works 3 jobs now so my sisters can stay in school. But at least he taught me something your rich father obviously couldn't: how to be a decent human being." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael felt tears freezing on his cheeks, thankful for Rose's waterproof makeup. His son, his beloved child, stood frozen, phone still recording this cruel moment for the entertainment of strangers. "I got an extra coat," Michael found himself saying, shrugging off his outer layer. The watch underneath caught the streetlight for just a moment, but no one noticed. "Take it, Alex. You need it more than me tonight." Alex hesitated before accepting the coat with trembling hands. "Thank you, sir," he whispered, then turned to Jason with one last look of disappointment before disappearing into the night. The group stood in uncomfortable silence, their phones lowered, the usual excitement of creating content dampened by the raw humanity they'd just witnessed. Even Marcus looked subdued. "Maybe we should go," someone suggested quietly. Jason stood rooted to the spot, staring at the space where Alex had been. For a moment, Michael thought his son might say something, might acknowledge the weight of what had just happened. Instead, Jason simply turned and walked away, his friends trailing behind him, leaving Michael shivering in more ways than one. As he watched his sons retreating back, Michael made a decision. This had gone far enough. It was time for the final act of his lesson, one that would either break through Jason's carefully constructed walls or break his father's heart trying. The storm arrived without warning, turning the evening sky into a churning mass of dark clouds. Michael, still in his Tom disguise, made his way to the place where everything would change, the front steps of his own home. Rain pounded against his remaining layers, the makeup Rose had so carefully applied now streaming down his face in subtle rivulets. Lightning illuminated the mansion's facade in stark bursts, and Michael thought about how differently the house looked from this perspective. No longer a symbol of success, but an imposing barrier between warmth and cold, belonging and exclusion. He huddled in the doorway, knowing Jason would be home soon from his evening basketball practice. Right on cue, headlights cut through the rain as David's car pulled into the circular driveway. He'd agreed to pick Jason up today, ensuring this moment would happen exactly as planned. Michael's heart thundered louder than the storm as he watched his son dash through the rain, designer gym bag held over his head. Jason stopped short when he saw the figure in the doorway. "Hey, what are you doing here?" His voice carried the familiar note of disdain, phone already emerging from his pocket. "This is private property." Michael stood slowly, letting the rain wash away more of his disguise. "Is it, Jason? Tell me, what makes a property private? The walls? The security system?" He took a step forward, watching confusion cloud his son's features. "Or is it the family inside? The memories? Like the time you fell down these steps when you were 6 and your mother held you until you stopped crying?" Jason's phone slipped slightly in his grip. "How do you?" "Or maybe," Michael continued, his voice growing stronger, "it's the lessons we learn here. Like the one your father taught you about giving your lunch money to Sarah Thompson in 3rd grade because it was the right thing to do." The phone clattered to the ground. Jason staggered backward, his face draining of color as recognition began to dawn. "No, it can't be." "Why not?" Michael stepped fully into the porch light, letting his son see the familiar features beneath the weathered disguise. "Because homeless people don't remember. Because they don't have stories. Because they're just content for your videos." "Dad?" Jason's voice cracked, years of carefully constructed coolness shattering like glass. "But how? Why?" Thunder crashed overhead as Michael closed the distance between them. "Because I needed to know who my son really was. Not the boy who gives perfect speeches about compassion, but the one who films people at their lowest moments for laughs. I needed to understand how the child who once gave away his lunch became someone who could mock a man for being hungry." Jason's legs gave out, and he sank onto the wet steps. "Those videos, that was you. All week." "Not just me," Michael said quietly. "Alex was real. His story was real. Every person you filmed, every life you've turned into entertainment. They're all real, Jason. Their pain is real." Tears mixed with rain on Jason's face as the full weight of his actions crashed down on him. "I didn't. I never thought." "That's the problem," Michael said, sitting beside his son on the steps. "You stopped thinking about them as people. Somewhere between gaining followers and chasing likes, you lost something more valuable than any award or social media fame." "Dad, I'm so sorry," Jason choked out. "The things I said to you. The way I acted. I'm not the one who needs your apology," Michael replied, pulling off the remainder of his disguise. "But I am the one who needs to apologize to you." Jason looked up, confused. "I failed you," Michael continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I gave you everything except the thing you needed most. The understanding that our privilege comes with responsibility, not entitlement. That success without compassion is failure in disguise." They sat in silence for a moment, the storm raging around them, father and son facing truths they'd both been avoiding. Finally, Jason spoke, his voice small but steady. "What do we do now?" Michael stood, holding out his hand to his son. "Now we start over. And this time, we do it right. Together." As they entered the house, both soaked and transformed, the phone lay forgotten in the rain, its screen dark, its power to corrupt momentarily washed away by something stronger, the power of real human connection. "Are you ready?" Michael asked, watching his son fidget with the makeup brushes in Rose's studio. 2 weeks had passed since the stormy revelation, and Jason's social media accounts had been silent ever since. "I don't know if I can do this, Dad," Jason admitted, staring at his reflection. Rose worked quietly, beginning to transform him just as she had transformed his father. What if I see someone I know? That's the point, Michael replied softly. Everyone you see will be someone you know, because they're all human beings, just like us. Rose stepped back, examining her work. Your father spent a week seeing the world through different eyes, she said, adding subtle shadows beneath Jason's now unrecognizable features. But you're going to do something harder. You're going to see yourself through different eyes. The plan was simple but profound. Father and son would spend 48 hours on the streets together, both in disguise, experiencing not just homelessness but the weight of their past actions. Michael had arranged everything through David. Their absence explained, their safety monitored from a distance, but their experience otherwise completely authentic. Their first stop was the coffee shop where Jason had filmed so many of his pranks. They sat on the cold pavement, cardboard signs beside them, watching as people streamed past. Jason flinched when he saw some of his former followers walk by, phones out, looking for content. That was me, he whispered, pulling his tattered coat tighter. I used to look for people to film, like I was hunting for props instead of meeting human beings. Around midnight, they met Alex again, not by chance this time, but by design. Michael had worked with David to find him, to understand his story. They found him at a youth shelter, where he stayed some nights while his father worked multiple jobs. I'm sorry, Jason said, his disguise allowing him to speak freely to his former classmate. I'm so sorry for everything. Alex shared his story over cups of donated coffee, how his mother's cancer had drained their savings, how his father fought to keep his sisters in school, how he spent his days looking for work, and his nights worried about his family's future. Jason listened, really listened, perhaps for the first time in years. As dawn broke, they made their way to a different shelter, where Michael had arranged for them to help serve breakfast. The line of people waiting for food stretched around the block. I recognize him, Jason murmured, nodding toward an elderly man near the front. I filmed him last month. He thanked me when I gave him $1, even after I'd mocked him online. Everyone here has a story, Michael said, handing out trays. Some lost everything to medical bills, like Alex's family. Some are veterans who never found their way back to civilian life. Some are running from abuse, fighting mental illness, or just trying to survive one day at a time. They worked through the morning, serving food, cleaning tables, and most importantly, listening. Each person who came through the line was no longer a potential viral video. They were individuals with names, histories, dreams, and struggles. During their lunch break, they met Rose again. She wasn't there to fix their makeup this time, but to share her own story of homelessness, of fighting her way back, of finding purpose in helping others through her art. The worst part wasn't the hunger or the cold, she told them, her eyes distant with memory. It was feeling invisible, like I'd stopped being human in everyone else's eyes. Jason's hands trembled as he gripped his paper cup. I did that, he said, his voice breaking. I made people feel invisible for entertainment. I turned their pain into content. Yes, you did, Rose agreed, her voice gentle but firm. But now you see them. Really see them. That's where change begins. As evening approached, they made their way to their assigned spot for the night, a small alcove that offered minimal shelter from the elements. Jason sat close to his father, both of them watching the city transform from day to night. Dad, Jason whispered into the gathering darkness. Yes, I want to make things right. Not just apologize, really make things right. But I don't know how. Michael smiled beneath his disguise. I think you do, he said. You just have to be brave enough to try. 3 months later, the same Grand Horizon Hotel ballroom hosted a very different kind of event. Instead of polished speeches and crystal trophies, the space was filled with folding tables, volunteers, and people from all walks of life. A banner hung overhead. See me. Stories beyond the streets. Jason stood at the entrance, no longer in an expensive suit but wearing a simple volunteer t-shirt. His phone was in his hand, but this time it served a different purpose. Documenting real stories with permission and respect, not for likes or follows, but for change. "Ready for your interview?" he asked Alex, who now stood beside him, not as a subject of mockery, but as the project's co-founder. Through Michael's connections and a crowdfunding campaign that had gone genuinely viral, Alex's family had received the help they needed. His father now managed the maintenance at one of Michael's buildings, while Alex had become the voice of countless young people facing similar struggles. "Born ready." Alex grinned, adjusting his own volunteer shirt. "But you're not posting this one online, right?" "No," Jason replied, thinking of his transformed social media presence. His millions of followers had dwindled to thousands after he deleted all his prank videos and posted a lengthy apology. But those who remained were there for something more meaningful, real stories of struggle, survival, and hope. Across the room, Michael watched proudly as his son conducted the interview. Jason listened intently as Alex shared his family's journey, asking thoughtful questions and treating each word with the respect it deserved. The footage would join their growing archive at the local library, where it would serve as a resource for schools and community organizations. Quite a change, isn't it? Rose appeared beside Michael, no longer the makeup artist who transformed faces, but a respected speaker who transformed perspectives. Her new cafe, partially funded by the sale of Michael's expensive watch, employed people transitioning out of homelessness. "I barely recognize him sometimes," Michael admitted, watching Jason help an elderly woman to her seat. "But then I do. This is who he always was, before the world taught him wrong lessons about worth and status." The event continued into the evening, with speakers sharing stories that would have been clickbait 3 months ago, but were now treated as precious gifts. Former executives spoke about losing everything to addiction. Veterans shared their struggles with PTSD. Young people like Alex detailed the invisible homelessness that plagued their generation. "Dad," Jason called out, waving Michael over to meet someone. "This is Mr. Thompson, Sarah's father." Michael shook hands with a man in a custodial uniform who beamed with pride. "Sarah told me what your son did in 3rd grade with his lunch money," Mr. Thompson said. "And now look at him, still feeding people, just in a bigger way." Later, as they cleaned up after the event, Jason found the old cardboard sign he'd kept from his 48 hours on the street. "Anything helps. God bless." The words meant something entirely different to him now. "You know what I learned?" Jason said, carefully folding the sign. "It's not just about helping people in need. It's about helping everyone see what I finally saw, that we're all one circumstance away from needing help, and we're all one act of kindness away from giving it." Michael pulled his son into a tight hug, remembering the cold nights, the harsh lessons, the tears of recognition in the rain. "And what else?" he prompted gently. "That true influence isn't about followers or likes," Jason continued. "It's about the changes we create in real lives. That's why we're calling it See Me, because everyone deserves to be seen, really seen, for who they are." As they left the ballroom, they passed a teenage boy filming something on his phone. Instead of cringing, Jason stopped to talk with him, sharing his own story of transformation. The boy lowered his phone, really listening, perhaps for the first time. Outside, the city lights sparkled against the night sky. Father and son stood for a moment, remembering their time on these streets from a different perspective. A homeless man passed by, and they both met his eyes with respect, exchanging nods of acknowledgement. "Ready to go home?" Michael asked. Jason smiled, watching the man until he disappeared around the corner. "We're already there, Dad. We're already there."